Oh.
So try to spread out a bit to the sides, guys, just so there are 3 stages to malting. Firstly, there's steeping, secondly, germination, and thirdly, drying or kilning. So first of all, the barley is steeped or soaked in water for about 2 days. We want to recreate the perfect conditions for it to trick it into thinking that it's still in the ground. And of course, the ground is very moist because that encourages germination. Germination is important because that will activate plenty of starches and enzymes in the barley and will make it easier to extract fermentable sugars from them later on in the process to make alcohol. So having soaked the barley for 2 days, it's then laid out on a tiled floor, such as the one above us, for germination for a further 4 to 5 days. At the end of that time, we have to stop germination. So to do that, the barley is dried out. In the past, fires were lit in these closed ovens you see at either side. Those are known as kilns. And the heat from the kilns, of course, rose up. Now, the barley was laid out above on tiles such as this on that side. But on the other side were holes, allowing the heat to rise through and dry out the barley. Once the barley is dried out, it's now malt. Malt looks the very same as regular barley, but it has a more crunchy consistency. It's kind of like a biscuit. In this distillery, we use a combination of both malted and unmalted barley to make our whiskies. This place is also an ideal area to point out one of the key differences between Irish whiskey and Scotch whiskey. In Ireland, in the past, we used a smokeless coal called anthracite to dry out the barley, and today it's done by gas heat. But in many Scotch distilleries, they do this process with open peat or turf fires, and that imparts a lot of smokiness to the final flavour of many Scotch whiskies, which is a flavour you typically don't find in many Irish whiskies. So that's one of the key differences. So now we have our barley and we have our malt and all of the rest of our grain. We're now going to go back outside and see some of the oldest buildings on the site. As we go there, we'll be walking through the grain store, and in that building you'll see some of the farming implements that were used in the past at the time of the harvest. But before leaving the maltings, I just want to point out these very stylish shoes on the left-hand wall. Sorry. These were worn by the men working upstairs in this building to protect their feet from the heat rising through the tiles while they were up there raking through the barley. And of course they also wore them to the discos of a Saturday night. Very stylish. Wood and leather. In the corner here, obviously a large bellows used to fan the flames in the kilns. So we'll head on then, guys.
It's amusing.
Are you all big whiskey fans?
Yeah.
No, not at all. You'll be converted after this. Sometimes it's an acquired taste, I think. People that like whiskey also like bourbon. Not necessarily. Like, I know people who love bourbon but not a massive fan of Scotch at all, or like, you know, it depends, because obviously they're all different types of whiskey, so and they all have different characteristics. So some people like, let's say, bourbon because it might be a bit sweeter and lighter, but don't like Scotch because it's more intense and kind of smoky sometimes. So it depends on the person. So we just walked through the grain store building where a lot of grain was kept in the past. If you look back at it now, you'll notice it has a lot of windows. That's because dusty environments like the grain store were prone to fires and explosions. So we needed plenty of ventilation to prevent that. You'll also notice the black cast iron discs. Those hold in place the iron tie bars running from one side of the building to the other, and they prevented it from bowing under the weight of the grain stored inside. Looking now at that lovely building on the other side of the trees, that's what we call our distiller's cottage. So as the name suggests, that was home to our master distillers on site here for many years in the past. Our former master distiller, Barry Crockett, who took his retirement in 2013, had been master distiller here for 47 years.
Oh yeah.
And Barry was actually born in that cottage.
Okay.
His father Max before him was also master distiller. And Barry is quite famous for having established the Midleton very rare whiskey in 1984, if you've heard of that.
Yeah.
Nowadays that cottage is used to house our company's archives. Looking now at this building behind me. This is the oldest built in UK in 1852. It replaced the wooden one that was here before it. And the wheel was the main source of motive power in the distillery in the past. It remained in operation until 1975 and the closure of the distillery here. It's made of cast iron, 6.6 metres in diameter, and it uses the power of the Dungourney River, which I mentioned is our local river and our water source as well. Now we're going to move into the mill building. We'll see more closely what the mill wheel did. And we go. Sorry, the brew house. In the past, this was used obviously to make alcohol in here. So after the mill building, we have the grist, the coarse flour. That was then brought in here and added into the likes of the vessel behind me. This is called a mash tun. Having added the grist into the mash tun, warm water is then added. And we call this mixture of grist and water mash. And we begin to continuously mix through the mash, like you've seen here, for about 5 hours. That mixing is transforming all of the starches in the mash into fermentable sugars. So it's extracting sugars from all of those starches and enzymes we've activated during the malting process. So after 5 hours of mixing, we then drain off just the sugary liquid from the mash. And that sugary liquid we call wort, and that's what we're going to use for fermentation. What's left behind in the mash tun, having drained off the wort, is a powdery substance. You'll see it on screen in a moment. That powdery substance is called draff, and it's full of nutrients and proteins, and it's sold on to local farmers as animal feed. So we've very happy cows in Midleton. No alcohol, but plenty of nutrients, no drunk cows. We drained off that sugary liquid, the wort. That's then fed into large vessels called washbacks to begin fermentation. These are old washbacks above us. Those have a capacity of 45,000 gallons or 207,000 litres. To begin fermentation, yeast is added to the wort. Yeast is a living organism which likes to consume anything sugary, and of course the wort is full of sugars. So over the course of about 3 days, the yeast consumes all of the sugars in the wort, and as a byproduct, it releases carbon dioxide and, of course, alcohol. This is called fermentation. At this stage, we essentially have what's a strong beer. We call it wash. It's about 10 to 12% alcohol by volume. Now, if we were brewers, we might stop here, but we're not. We're whiskey makers. So now we're going to take this wash or beer right onto the real heart of the whiskey making process, and that of course is distillation. We're going to create a spirit. So next we're going to move into the still house and I'll talk about distillation. As you're leaving, feel free to pop up here and have a look into the mash tun.